Welcome to Return of the Hack, the discussion series that brings you cyber stories behind the technology. I'm Neil Langridge, your host, and today I was joined by Dave Barnett of Cloudflare. We look at business email compromise, how it's evolved, and the role people play in its cyber defenses, and the development of cloud cybersecurity. Hi everybody, welcome to the first in our new series. I'm here talking to Dave Barnett from Cloudflare. Lovely for you to join us here today, Dave.
You know what, it's great, and I feel like I've kind of come home because 26 years ago when I started my career in IT, I started it with E92, actually. Electronics 1992 plus it was called at the time.
There we go. Okay, and that'll be a little secret Easter egg that we'll leave for one later in the series, and maybe a prize for anybody that can guess what how the name came about and what it all stands for completely. So yeah, absolutely. No, lovely to have you back joining us. So if you want to kind of give a little bit background about yourself and what you're doing at the moment with Cloudflare.
Yeah, sure. So as I say, I started 26 years ago, and at the time it was all around connectivity and getting machines to talk to each other. And then as we moved into sort of 2005, 2010, my career migrated towards security because it was kind of apparent in the industry that, networks having connectivity is one thing, but securing them is kind of important. So organizations like McAfee, which I then went to work for, and some of the PKI vendors that I sort of later followed up with. And then I went to work for Symantec, which was around consolidation. So trying to, drive cost out at the time and trying to, deliver more sort of joined up security. I then went to work as a CTO, regional CTO at Symantec, and did an awful lot of work with academia. And actually, my claim to fame is I was one of the co-authors of the first cybersecurity, one of the first cybersecurity standards globally, PAS 555. Yeah, that's really cool. And then I kind of got back into security. I went and worked for Zscaler. I was one of the early employees at Zscaler, where we were trying to convince people that security could be delivered from the cloud. And ever since, I've really been involved in cloud security and data governance and stuff like that. So I now today I have the honour of leading the SASE and email security practice at Cloudflare. So we've got some wonderful colleagues that are really kind of experts in that area, in terms of network security and email security.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So interesting on the certification. So does that mean that lots of people kind of have your name as being someone who helps save them and get them through stuff? Or in terms of like, this guy made me kind of, hit all these boxes and go against all these targets? Probably a little bit of both.
A little bit of both. But, I'm a bit of a magpie. I pick things up as I go along. And, it's amazing what customers tell me. And it's amazing to watch the way that customers have migrated to the cloud and way that security's played a much higher prominence in their sort of thinking, really, over time. And it's been quite an honour, really. I've done you do a bit of retrospection when you're 50. You kind of look back and go, how's it all gone? And I've got no regrets. I've also every single day I've learned something from somebody, which is kind of to my benefit.
And I think definitely with security, and you can tell by the different areas you've been in, it doesn't stop moving. It doesn't stop changing any time in terms of not just the threat landscape, which, we can all talk about, and all the changes and evolving challenges there. But also, it's the same in terms of the fundamental technology everybody's using, although it does move a little bit in circles. There's many times when we're talking about thin client computing, and I think we had mainframes and dumb terminals. I'm fairly sure, that's what we had. But there's definitely a circular nature to it. But it is constantly evolving. And I suppose cloud security is now getting to that place where it is just security to an extent, in terms of, I think there will be few organizations that don't have that as part of their strategy or their current deployment and infrastructure already.
I think security just needs to get out of the way and let people do what they want to do. But it's funny when you should mention it, Neil, because when I first started out with 2+, we were trying to connect terminals to mainframes, or a terminal on a PC to a mainframe, and then of course it became client server. So we were connecting virtual people on desktops to virtual machines in a data center somewhere, and now it's connecting people on mobile devices or wherever they choose to be to cloud services. And it's kind of like bouncing backwards and forwards. And that whole cyclical nature, I completely agree with you. But the way that businesses are looking at risk has changed, though, because when it was stuff that they owned, like the PC that well, when I worked for E92, right? So when the PC that E92 provided me, on the network that E92 Plus put me on, because I couldn't use it anywhere else, to the data center that E92 owned, everything was owned by and controlled. And that was pretty cool, because then you could measure risk by, the vulnerability of the device, by the threat that's affecting the vulnerability, and by the value of the device. So if it's the CEO Mukesh Gupta's PC, and it's an old version of Office 365, or old version of Windows as it was then, and there was an active virus that was attacking, you knew that was the one you had to fix.
Yeah.
But the problem is when it's a mobile device over a public internet to a cloud application that at best you've got a contract with, if worse you probably don't know. That's the difficulty. And that's why the whole thing has shifted towards understanding what is the behavior of the user, what is the data, and what's the cloud application they're using. And that's how cloud security risk has evolved, in my view.
Yeah, and I think ownership is kind of like a key point. You could own that network, you could own everything, whereas now you don't own the network. You probably, as you mentioned, BYD, you don't own the device, you don't own the network. I'm currently working from home, so E92 doesn't own my router that was kindly provided by the ISP, and I'm sure has various levels of security on it. And also the whole definition of the cloud. We don't own our own clouds. And there is, it's kind of baked into the kind of model of public cloud that I think it's easy to forget about, the entire concept of shared responsibility, which I think is one of the kind of most easily forgotten parts of cloud security, and forgetting that actually that it is all shared, and you do need to own some of it, but we all need to own different parts of it ourselves in very different ways.
Actually, shared security responsibility model is one I'm a mad fan of. But let me put it this way, right? I'm 45 right now.
Yeah, we'll go with it.
The way my movie plays out in the next 10 years is two endings. One is I die, which is not desirable, or the second one is I retire, which is what I want to do. So I want to retire when I'm 60, right? That's a fair, reasonable time to retire. Not a great time to die, I must say. But I want a economy that is buoyant. I want my shares in my pensions and everything to be worth something. I want my country to be successful. And in order to be successful, I cannot bestow the sins of me and my fathers upon the people that are generating wealth right now. Now, the castle and moat approach that we've loved, right? Putting data centers over here, having people connect to them over links that you own, it just doesn't work. And it doesn't work because CISOs have told, no matter how many independent surveys, CyberEdge, IBM, Verizon, they told them it's not working. According to the CyberEdge 2022 report, there is between a 7 in 10 and a 9 in 10 chance that CISOs have said that they were successfully compromised last year. Now, I don't know about you, Neil, but if you're living in a neighborhood where 9 out of 10 of your neighbors get attacked successfully, they get broken into, I'm not going to be doing what they're doing.
No.
I'm going to do something different. So to enable our wonderful digital artisans of today, the people that are out there generating wealth so that my pension fund is worth something, we need to be helping them getting security out of the way and making it simple. Now, there are a few very simple things we can do to do that. And those are starting to emerge. Things like zero trust. And what we're here to talk about now today is anti-phishing and email security.
Yeah, absolutely. And putting the user at the core of that, I think, is central. It's such a cliche about users being the front line of security, but kind of also being the first to get blamed as well. But also, they're pivotal in terms of thinking about them not just as users or as numbers or as somebody at the control of an endpoint. They are just people, and it's people that are fundamental to productivity. To all of these organizations being successful, and how we measure security is not just being effective, but also, as you quite rightly say, enabling productivity and not being another thing for people to curse that stops them being able to do their job effectively.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, my mother, bless her, 10 years ago, she asked me what I did for a living, and I say I help secure companies and help stop cyber threats and risk. And she was like, yeah, thanks, Dave. And a few hours later, I heard her saying to her friends on the phone, I'm not entirely sure what Dave does, but I think it's something about stopping people from stealing computers. And I'm like, okay, I love you, Mum. You're 70 years old. If that's your world, then that's cool with me. But during COVID, my mother, I sent her an iPad. and she's confident using that iPad now. So 10 years on, she's comfortable with it being, with using technology. It's not scary for her. Okay, I had to tell her how to tap properly rather than just pushing it like a doorbell. Push it like a doorbell. It's a very good tip. If you're an 80-year-old mother, tell her to push like a door. But security just happens in the background, right? She doesn't have to worry about it because it's a secure environment for what she needs to do. And that's the beautiful thing, right? We need to come to them. We can't I can't tell Neil Langridge that you have to work in a certain place or use a certain device because why should I? I haven't got the right to do that. I shouldn't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also kind of empowering people to think positively about it and not guilt as well. I think we've seen plenty of businesses in the past, and that's where we come on to what does good look like? How can we kind of position and frame security in the right way that people think about it positively as being good for their lives? Too often it is just seen as being a negative, and especially when you kind of get into that blame culture. Again, kind of like phishing training programs that have gone wrong. And we've seen this a lot over COVID, of the need to be able to do this, but positioning it in a way of, oh, you failed this, you did this wrong, and therefore you're being made to look stupid, or even tricking people into getting involved in security, which, one of the things I feel that's most important is building a positive security culture. Which is a challenge with everybody being remote, but by building a positive security culture, that's how you get everybody on board through the medium of behavior rather than just technology. Because if it's technology alone, it's not going to work.
I completely agree with you. And IT for so long has been seen as the it crowd. The people who are downstairs and they're kind of just telling people what to do. It's like they need to be seen as the innovating together crowd. They need to be absolutely a positive message. I mean, here at Cloudflare, there was a Twilio attack. It was an SMS smishing attack that happened, and 3 people fell for it within our company. And there's a blog post all about it and what happened. And the thing is, they reported it without fear. And the reason they could report it without fear is because our culture is we don't blame people for being people. I want people to click things. I don't want to teach people to be wary about everything. So if you think about the artisans of the last few hundred years, they produce great things, paintings, art, music, whatever, because they've chosen their own tools and because they've kept those tools clean. And that's our job, is to keep the tools clean and to give people choice. But, the number one tool that people use, and has been for a long time, since I was working at United 2, is email. Yeah. And, Bill Gates, I think, was famous for saying, that he felt that the spam problem would be over and done with, by, I don't know, whenever, 1995 or 2000 or whatever. The spam wasn't done with. But when I was at United 2, that's when the email hygiene world started to happen. And the spam was the first thing that people started to solve. So, let's catch that nasty spam. And that, unfortunately, has evolved into where we are with email hygiene right now, which most of the mainstream email vendors are still based upon character matching. Does it look like something we've seen before? Yeah. Which is kind of part of the problem, because people are relying on stuff that just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of kind of where you're seeing at the moment, so I think we've seen plenty of numbers in terms of that rise in phishing, and well, it's not just phishing. It's, as you say, it's smishing. If it's coming over text, we've seen a huge rise of that, both in the consumer space in terms of people, whether it's COVID vaccinations or whether it's delivery notifications, but obviously definitely seeing at work, an attempt to be able to whether it's transferring money or whether it's kind of just getting access to people's machines or just starting that engagement piece. We're definitely seeing a big increase kind of at the moment. What are the kind of, in terms of how are the techniques evolving that Cloudflare, that you're seeing in terms of kind of, the tactics that bad actors are using?
Well, I mean, what we're seeing is reflected with what Verizon have seen in their Data Breach Investigations Report 2022, which is the fact that social engineering against human beings has gone through the roof. And it's because we're living our lives online. We're putting more information every day online. So, if you look at a typical spear phishing, business email compromise, phishing, whatever, they've all got a reconnaissance phase at the start, and that's mapped over into the MITRE attack chain, of course. Where does Dave work? What does Dave do? What's Dave's email domain? Can we create a domain that looks very similar to Dave's, so that if Dave receives an email from E92 plus, but the E's got a little fodder over it because it's the Irish alphabet, or it's got instead of a 9, it's a G. You know, if you create a lookalike domain, send him an email, and then all of a sudden Neil trusts Dave because Dave works at the same place that Neil does, apparently. So this whole, social engineering as an initial incursion is just gone through the roof, and that's unfortunately something that's very difficult to detect.
Yeah, and it kind of comes back to that ownership point as well, is you can't absolutely own everything around your domain or everything around anything that looks like your domain. So when something comes in, we want to have that trust. And I suppose that kind of ties in with the zero trust thing. It's very difficult to be able to completely eliminate trust from it, because you have to enable people to be able to get on, to be able to recognize things, while obviously being skeptical at the same time. But people just don't necessarily have time or the ability to be able to go through everything in detail in terms of checking every domain, going through in terms of email headers. People just don't have that knowledge or expertise. So we know that's going to be the target. So it's a case of making sure that the technology, I suppose, is supplementing what people need to do from their own perspective in terms of what we can help them around kind of training and doing that first level check.
Yeah, I mean, zero trust for us is more of a mindset than a single product. And it's there was an old KGB saying, I think, that broadly translates to, never trust, always verify. And that's the concept of zero trust, right?
Yeah.
Like most things, actually, zero trust was invented in the UK. Most great things, should I say. Like, cellular telephone communications and business computers and stuff like that. But in 2003, there was a couple of CISOs, Paul Simmons and David Lacey, so Paul from ICI and David from the Royal Mail. They came together and they formed something called the Open Group, which looked at deperimeterization. Sorry, the Jericho Forum, which looked at deperimeterization, which they then merged into the Open Group, and then eventually became Zero Trust when I think it was Forrester or IDC picked it up. And like most Americans, they called it something really snazzy and people bought it.
It was a thing, yeah.
It was a thing. But the whole point is, if I send you an email and you trust me, then you're going to do something that you wouldn't have done before.
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do at Cloudflare is, where it matters, where it's easy, where it's sensible, reduce the trust, but actually verify. So, in terms of zero trust network access, for example, instead of a VPN, you could just have a direct connection to an application if you trust that person properly because he verified it.
Yeah.
On email, sorry. So on email, what we're trying to do is allow people to get out of the way of people to trust, so that they can trust that the emails that come in are actually legitimate, because the technology is just filtering out the bad stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely finding a bit of a balance, because I think historically there's been a case of we don't trust our users to be able to do anything, because we'll assume that they're going to click on something wrong, and the training is based on that. But then on the other hand, zero trust is trying to address the challenge around kind of least privilege, when sometimes we have too much privilege, especially at the core on things like sysadmins and something where we give them entire access to all the keys to the network. And actually, rather than having you either trusted or not trusted, we need to find, there needs to be a lot more subtlety to that.
Well, the traditional technologies that we use to deal with that. So VPNs were invented in 1997, the same year that the DVD was invented, and 1 year after I joined E92 Plus, when we were selling was Hummingbird Exceed. Email security dates back from the mid-90s, when the Macarena, Macarena was popular. So
I think we're learning a lot about your cultural references, Dave. I think.
Yeah. Look it up if you don't know it. Macarena is a great song, but those technologies are old, and that's what people are relying on. They're relying on a VPN to connect to a network because that's where the applications are. Good luck. Yeah, it's just insecure and it's expensive. We can fix that. People are relying on email security that's based on spam, and good luck, we can fix that. By other ways.
Yeah.
That we happen to make. But the point being is, these are problems that are easy to solve. We just have to think slightly different.
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the challenges as well, that I think there was, as well as you're saying, kind of people had assumed, such as Bill Gates, in terms of the death of spam. There's been lots of references to the death of email as well, and then kind of stuff's going to take over. It's going to be messaging, it's going to be Slack and what have you. So it's one of those challenges, I think, where we've got to use the new technology while understanding that a lot of infrastructure still fundamentally hasn't changed. There'll be lots of we'll be using email for a long time to go. We've all moved to the cloud, but we've still got our old on-premise networks, and we still potentially have there are organisations out there obviously still running mainframes and AS400s and what have you. So the old problems remain. They evolve a little bit. So it's a case of having the new technology that addresses the new threats, but while fundamentally accepting that other things just aren't going to be able to change, and we need to constantly adapt to working with them and embracing them.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, if you're in a personal capacity, not a work capacity, you typically use email because you need to authenticate whatever it is you're doing. So a bank needs to trust you, and an airline needs to trust you, and an employer needs to trust you. If you're applying for a job, you can't just do that. Although in China and stuff like that, you can use WeChat for a lot of payments and stuff like that. And in Africa, you could use SMSs for payments and stuff. Yeah. So, but email is central to a consumer. From a work point of view, it's a business tool, and 100% of companies, and I'll take a challenge on this, but 100% of companies use email. And 90% of those companies have moved to Office 365 according to Gartner, or G Suite, or a cloud-based alternative. The point is, it's really important, and we're not going to take stuff away from people just because it's insecure. We have to figure out ways to fix it without getting in their way.
Yeah. And I think the kind of the next level, and then in terms of kind of understanding those users, is who potentially is going to be a target as well. So I think one of the challenges that we faced is a lot of people who think they're not necessarily going to be the target do end up being. We know, we know that kind of CISOs, or we know that CFOs or people in finance are obviously going to be targeted. But you talked earlier about reconnaissance. Sometimes that people might not necessarily think, oh, I'm not high profile enough, I don't hold any particular valuable kind of estate or assets. But increasingly, cyber criminals are very, 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 very clever in terms of understanding ways into an organisation. And it really is a multi-step model, that they're not just going to start with the most important. They're not going to go for the kingpin. They'll work their way out, and they'll go for the softer, easy targets to be able to work their way across. So how organisations can try and communicate that everyone potentially is it can be a target depending on the sort of attack.
Well, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because the whole way that people steal money from companies, and trust me, Google and Apple, Google and Facebook had 121 million stolen in BEC. But the whole point is, it's pretty well known, right? So back in 2003, Kevin Mitnick, at the time he was a high-profile hacker. He's now a security person, but he wrote a book called The Art of Deception. In chapter 1 in The Art of Deception, it talked about how he hacked a bank with a phone, and the way he hacked it was he identified a bank branch and somebody within a bank branch that he could build a relationship with. So he identified who in a branch had authority to give him a piece of information. He then developed a relationship with that person. He spent a month or two just, routinely calling them up and pretending that he was from another branch, just asking them what they're having for tea, and, just as a friend, just getting acquainted. So the person trusted him. He groomed them, which is step 2 in business email compromise. But this was 20 years ago that Kevin did it with a phone. He then took pieces by the way, he was doing this with multiple people. So he then understood what elements needed to constitute a transfer of money from one bank to another. He then used the relationship he developed with various people to piece these pieces of information together and exchange that information with the person who was responsible for doing a bank transfer. And then he managed to steal money. He got a wire transfer from that bank to him. And that is what he did with a phone in 2003 is exactly what business email compromise is right now. Step 1, identify a target. Use social media or whatever you need to do. Create a lookalike domain so that when you send an email or a message, or an email typically, or a LinkedIn message to that person within that bank that's got probably a piece of information the attacker needs, groom them. Step 2. Step 3, exchange the information you need to execute that wire transfer. Step 4, steal it. And that stealing can happen in a lot of ways. It could happen as, impersonation. I'm with the Facebook, I think it was Facebook and Google, it was invoices. We built up a relationship, now can you pay these invoices? Sure, yeah, no problem, Bob, that's fine. Because he knew what pieces of information they needed in order to pay that. And they were such a big company, they didn't even notice it. 121 million. That's not bad. The guy served 5 years in prison, but that's not a bad annual rate. But I'm joking. The point being is, though, it hasn't changed. It's just that it's technology now. It's social media. It's the creation of lookalike domains. It's smart people convincing people that have just overworked trying to do their job to give them information and trust them, and then go stealing money. That's BEC, basically.
But those fundamentals have. I mean, do we not necessarily kind of concentrate that enough on the human psychology around for building our cybersecurity strategy? The focus is sometimes a little bit too much on the technology itself.
I think these things need to come together. So, as you say, I mean, phishing awareness is really important, but it's not massively effective because human nature is to touch stuff, and to, we're the most wonderful people in a, element of the chain, but we're also the weakest link, as Anne Robinson might say. But so that's it. So you need to train people, and I think most people are aware that, when somebody emails you saying, "Hi, I'm a Nigerian prince. Could you send me some money?" That they're kind of like, maybe not, or I've decided that I fall in love with you. I don't know you yet, but would you like to send me some money? It's like, maybe not. So people are starting to become more and more aware, which is great, right? But they need to. There will always be an occasion that they will click something or do something, no matter how good the training is. So you need to have layers of security that are appropriate for the risk, that don't get in their way. Because Neil, if I force you to use a certain email client or force you to use a certain web browser or whatever, it's like...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, normally IT terminology is always created by IT, but it's shadow IT was effectively created by users as a way of, how can I get round IT? How can I be? It shows people can be creative, because if you stop them doing their job, they'll just find another way of doing it. And actually, stuff like cloud technologies, if you're a marketing person and previously, if you wanted to run a marketing campaign, you had to kind of organize a server, you had to speak to IT, they had to deploy it, you had to buy software, you had to install it, you had to set up connectors. Now, if you're running Salesforce, you can just spin up a new instance, or you can go to Marketo, you can get everything integrated, all the APIs are out of the box. You probably don't even need to talk to IT anymore. So people can just always find their ways around it. So I suppose, what are the key things that we need to do to be able to get those users on board? One of the key things, obviously, not put roadblocks in their way, but how else can we make sure that users are bought in proactively, rather than just, I promise to not try to click on something that I shouldn't do?
First of all, we can stop. I mean, we all use the word, but we can stop using the word users. There's only two industries in the world that use the word users. One's illegal drugs, and the other one's IT. These are people.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody uses it.
I mentioned it at the start, and then I went back to saying users again. So I'm as guilty as everyone else.
That's okay. And head count. I hate head count. They're heart counts. These are human beings, right, that we're dealing with. Quite often smarter than us old folk. To be fair, they're very motivated, highly intelligent people that just need to get their jobs done. So our responsibility in this whole equation is to get the problems out of the way without them bothering them. And that's not by doing it the same way that we've been doing it for 11,000 years, which is creating a castle, putting the good stuff in the castle, and then walls and people to stop them, right? Because you build a bigger wall, people build a bigger ladder, right? You get somebody with a gun, somebody gets somebody with a tank. It just doesn't work. People operate outside the walls. So we need to take a holistic approach to security. Adopt the principles of zero trust. Zero trust network access, zero trust web browsing, zero trust email security. And by that I mean is give people what they need once they've proven who they are, without them having to do anything.
Yeah.
So VPNs, get rid of VPNs, because people don't like typing stuff in. Yeah, people don't like carrying the fobs around. I don't have to carry it around anymore. We use zero trust network access. Yeah. Zero trust email security. Give people email that is known to be clean, not known to be bad. So adopt an email security solution that is designed to deal with business email compromise and phishing. Zero trust web browsing. Instead of getting somebody to a website, how about getting them to a remote browser isolated website? But it has to perform as well as it would be, otherwise. So these whole zero trust approach, where you're not actually giving people the trust that they don't need, you're giving them the stuff they do.
And I suppose that also then helps build confidence, and that can encourage people that they know they're not going to have to just look out for absolutely everything. They don't feel like they're on their own. They're working more in partnership with the IT team. They've got their back effectively, rather than I think they just feel that they're going to be left. And if you do click on something or you do see something bad, then everybody goes, well, we had a training program and you clearly didn't pay attention, and therefore, this one's on you. I think it creates a more inclusive culture that way.
I completely agree. And you mentioned shadow IT a short while ago. So instead of looking at shadow IT as a problem, how about we give people access to everything? We give access to everything in a controlled environment. So one of the things that came through COVID was people started to solve problems using shadow IT, right? So you can imagine a week into COVID, I've been given a laptop I'm working for a bank. I've been given a laptop. Instead of working as a clerk in a bank, I'm given a CSR job for online because, I've got lots of customers that want to access the bank, but they can't go into a bank, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So a company's given me a laptop, given me a way to communicate with customers, but probably hasn't caught up with a way of transferring files. So all of a sudden, I'm like, how do I do my job, right? And then along comes my son, who's 10 years old, and he goes, Dad, I can fix that one. Why don't you use WhatsApp? WhatsApp's really good, and it's fast, and better still, it's free. So all you got is people that are trying to do their best. IT hasn't provided them with tools, and Shadow IT has. So one of the big movements at the moment is how can you use Shadow IT to crowdsource, or look at Shadow IT as a way of crowdsourcing information technology that's been ideas that have been generated by users. Because if the users generate the ideas, generally they're right. Generally it's a good solution because it sits with the subconscious. Why do we use WhatsApp? It feels right. It's wrong, but it feels right. Why do I want to use Skype that's been forced upon me by the company and it's all restricted and I can't talk to half the people? I've got a job to do. I've got customers to deal with in my bank.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. If you look at Shadow IT as a source of crowdsourcing information, then the whole world changes. But you have to put in place security that gets out the way of the user. So if you're using, I don't know, WeTransfer or whatever, intercept the data and see what's in it. Or if you're allowing people to go to, GitHub or some sort of a development environment, if that's what their job is, make sure that they can't, upload or download stuff that could be sensitive or dangerous to the company.
Yep. And I think embracing some of those new technologies and new platforms and new ways of working that kind of the younger workforce are bringing in, because, they're going to be the ones that are going to be the business leaders over the next kind of 10 and 20 years. And I think, it's very easy sometimes to be dismissive of people coming in and the assumption that, kind of younger people coming in, or they want to work a certain way, or they're trying to get out of something, or they're trying to do shortcuts. But actually, the whole point is if they're trying to do shortcuts, that's probably because they're smart and they've worked out what a shortcut is to be able to make themselves more effective and productive. So I think we definitely need to find ways of, kind of crowdsourcing that intelligence in terms of what's going to be the next way of business communication. Because you or me could probably have a chat and go, yeah, this is definitely what's going to happen in the next 10 years. But as you say, our kids are going, we already know what it's going to be, and we're just waiting for you to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a very Nordic way of looking at things, but, the ideas in an organization need to come from the people who are actually doing this stuff, and the people at the top need to be the ones to, control budgets, perhaps, control compliance, maybe, but just get the rocks out of the way of the people that need to get stuff done. And I mean, when I joined E&I 26 years ago, things like SAP and Oracle and all these big projects that people would spend hundreds of millions of pounds on would be bought by the people at the top of the organization, but the people at the bottom, they had very little say at all. And that's the reason why, for example, the National Programme for IT under Richard Grange had crashed and burned in 2009, because the doctors didn't want to use it. It was designed by some bureaucrats. It cost £11 billion. It was the largest IT project in the world at the time. So you have to engage the users and listen to them. Otherwise, they'll just go and use WhatsApp.
Absolutely. Yes, they will. And I think for us as a channel, I think that's one of the most kind of valuable things we can do. We probably don't do enough. Maybe there's too much focus on technology. It's getting out into organizations and making sure that we're talking to everybody and not just talking to the IT people. And maybe, is that one of the things I always felt, is that one of the things that the channel should be doing more of, kind of driving that engagement with end user organizations, with customers, in terms of making sure that it kind of building those constructive conversations, building those open sessions where everybody can get involved, everybody can have a conversation, and working, building that security culture from the ground up. So it's obviously not just about technology sale or even consultancy. It's about driving that engagement and bringing best practice and examples. We always talk about best practice. It's not best practice. It's just stories. It's just like it's stories that other people have done that have been successful or interesting, and that's what people respond to. They don't tend to respond to white papers. They don't always respond to complex solution briefs. There's always good stuff in them, but actually it's the stories that are the ones that engage us, and that's how people go, oh, okay, right, I get that now. I understand. That's how we can communicate best.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't it be great if I was in a channel, I'd probably consider starting some kind of consultancy around that. I'd be asking people who do stuff, how can we create a kind of workplace that helps you get your stuff done? How can we create a workplace that's more in line with your values as a person? Do you care about the climate? Do you care about where your supply chain and how that impacts people, and so on and so forth? And what will come out of that will be a lot of really good ideas, and those ideas then need to translate into actions. Actions will be underpinned by security best practice, I guess. There's certain technologies that can help, but you probably get a more honest and unfiltered answer in it if you create a safe space for people to talk rather than leaders to talk.
Yeah. And I think that we know that big changes are capable. I think one of the lessons definitely from the last 2 years has shown us that if we absolutely need to make big changes, then we can do it. And I think one of the things that kind of IT should be proud of, and cybersecurity as well. I mean, we know big issues do happen, and obviously we know a lot of organisations have been breached, but by and large, the last 2 years, the IT channel have enabled organisations to undergo incredibly massive changes, phenomenal digital transformation to be able to keep organisations just literally alive, functionally working. And I think it's easy to underestimate that. So we can do it, and I think we just need to be confident enough and just make sure that we take everybody with us when we're doing that journey.
I mean, it is true that COVID has accelerated digital transformation. It's like the fourth C-suite, CIO, CTO, and COVID, and it's accelerated digital transformation. Work from home, work hybrid work, and we use some more cloud, more mobile device, that sort of thing. And the channel's played a very important part in that. But now we're not post-COVID, but we're post the major impact of COVID.
Yeah.
Where do we go? How can we create a better world for our employees, and how can we just make them safe? And those pieces are in place, right? But the problem, I guess, is that we're also facing an economic climate that isn't likely to, allow major investments in speculative stuff. So everything we do needs to be accompanied by a very strong return on investment. And I'm happy to say there's a number of initiatives around that. So, for example, the FAIR Institute, and which is a quantitative analysis of security investment in pound terms,
yeah,
dollars or euros, depending where you come from. And then at Cloudflare, we've really focused on return on security investment. So yes, whenever we start to offer our larger customers, consolidation type approaches, it's usually accompanied by a pound number at the end that they will save if they do something. And that is a collaborative discussion that we have with the company that we're selling.
Yeah. Because it is too easy to think of security just as being insurance, but from kind of where we touched on the importance of security not stopping people doing their job. If it enables productivity, then it absolutely is it's a business enabler. It enables organisations to be more effective, to be more dynamic, and to be more confident because they've got the right processes, they've got the right security layers in place, and therefore they are able to recognise ROI from their investment.
Yeah, and what's the opportunity cost of not doing something, for example? I mean, the way that CIOs typically look at it is they don't look at the detail, they'll look at the fact that Neil's costing £15,000 a year in all of IT, because they just take the total sum of IT cost and divide it by the number of users. So what can we do to reduce that? What can we do to make it safe so that the risk, in fact, no, what can we do to reduce it? Because the reduction is a function of the reduction in risk of something bad happening and GDPR breaches and stuff like that. So, I mean, the thing is, we're also facing, unfortunately, a climate where the cost of something happening is gone through the roof as well. We've seen a massive increase in ransomware. I mean, every type of email that comes in from a bad person is a phishing attack. I mean, it has been since 2023. But the purpose of it against humans. Like we talked about social engineering the last couple of years since post-COVID. Well, I mean, ransomware has just gone through the roof. I mean, the ENISA, the European Union and ENISA, I believe it is, put out a list of risks. And the highest risk that they have in IT is ransomware, because the average cost of business email compromise in ransomware around about 5 million. Yeah. That could bring a company to its knees. I mean, there was a dentist surgery. I think they had about 100 dentist surgeries in Holland that got attacked by ransomware a couple of months ago, and it's like 2 million, and they paid it. Yeah. They acknowledged that they paid. Hardly anybody acknowledges they pay anything, because the insurance companies won't let them. I mean, look at the HSE in Ireland. The poor guys in Ireland. They lost everything. The health and safety executive, pretty much every IT system in Irish healthcare was affected by this ransomware attack. It was insane. The cost. There was an old saying, why do you rob banks, Mr. Bank Robber? Well, that's where the money is, right? And so the malware sites, the people that have, do this stuff, they've pretty much flipped over to ransomware and business email compromise. I mean, business email compromise, the FBI estimated it's 46 million, I think, 46 billion was the total cost of ransomware since 2016, I think. So in 6 years. So we're looking at 7 billion a year.
Yeah. Just
ransomware. Sorry, excuse me, just business email compromise.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, forcing people, convincing people to send them money for invoices that don't exist, or so on and so forth. So it's just a lot of money. There's a lot of very rich criminals out there.
There are, and they follow the same principle of what's the best return on investment. And ransomware is undoubtedly the most lucrative, because it can be highly targeted and highly profitable, but it can also be entirely indiscriminate, which again removes that. Could I be a target? Everyone's a target when they can be as broad as they possibly can be, without needing to do. Sometimes it's in-depth social engineering, and sometimes it's a smishing attack to 1,000 random million random mobile numbers that they bought somewhere off some dumped data dump.
Well, I completely agree with you. And here at Cloudflare, we make a system that is called Cloudflare Area 1 that is designed the express purpose of identifying email attacks on an organization before they have ever existed in the wild. So we want to try and get left of breach. And I was chatting with a CISO just last week, and he was talking about how, saying, well, look, we put you after Office 365 ATP, E5 ATP, and we found about 25% of the stuff that we found was not found by Office 365 ATP. Yeah. And it's because of the way we do it. I won't go into too much detail, but the way we do it. So I was kind of like, well, how many emails do you need to get a ransomware? And he goes, one. All I need is one attack to slip through, and that's what matters. Here at Cloudflare, the approach that we've taken at a very high level is we scan the entire internet. That's 8 billion things on the internet every week. It's the second largest crawling network in the world. And what we do is we take that information and then we apply advanced machine learning, artificial intelligence to help understand, if somebody's coming in, is it from E92 or E with a fodder .92, or is it something that looks like the domain? What's the context of what they're sending in? Is there something in there that sounds fishy? Is there a link that perhaps they're sending in, but maybe that link might change over time and push over to a malware site? So what we're trying to get to, and we have a 1 in 5 million false positive rate, is no bad stuff on the email, so people can just trust it.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. So. Smashing that. I think we've covered an absolutely incredible number of topics. Really appreciate your time. Nice to end with one single takeaway. So if there's one thing that you'd think organisations or somebody listening, right, what is the one thing I need to do? I've probably got a million things to do on my list now, but what should be the one thing at the top of the list that they should do next in terms of reviewing their cybersecurity strategy or talking to their customers about their cybersecurity strategy?
Go to zerotrustruroadmap.org, which is our website, where we put a vendor agnostic, yes, we include competitors, rundown of how Zero Trust approach can help in a number of ways, some of which we can help with, some of which we can't. Zerotrustruroadmap.org. Perfect. Taking it from being a nice theoretical concept to what can I actually do? That's what it needs to be practical, or people aren't going to be able to embrace it fully. Well, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much, Dave, for your time. Much appreciated. Thank you, Neil. It's great to speak with you. Okay, speak to you soon. Thank you. Take care.